What Texas Tech is doing is going to help TCU and the rest of the Big 12.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. I've been covering TCU athletics for the past 12 years. We're brought to you today by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money today. Thank you for making Locked On Horned Frogs your first listen. We'll get to some fall camp notes later on in the show. We're going to take a little bit of a break from practice reports because the team has a couple days off. They had a scrimmage on Sunday, had a light day Monday, day off Tuesday. So I want to talk about the Big 12 and some big picture things, but all of it relates to TCU, as it always does, on Locked On Horned Frogs. If you haven't heard, Texas Tech is spending a lot of money. Have you heard that, right? They're going after it, right? In the transfer portal, they did that this offseason, and they're also doing it at the high school level as well. They went and got Micah Hudson from Lake Belton a few off seasons back. Now, that's been its own saga, but to their credit, he is back in Lubbock after going to A&M and then coming back. Not sure what expectations are for him this year, but he's back in the fold. Been kind of a tumultuous, very short college career so far for him. Felix Ojo, a 2025 commit, or 2026 commit, excuse me, that is about as highly rated as you get as an offensive tackle. 5-star, according to 247 Sports, the number one offensive tackle in the state of Texas. Top 5 player in the country, blue chip guy. LaDamian Guyton, a 2027 player, is committed to Texas Tech, and he's like a top 5 player in that class. And I think the Guyton commitment is really interesting because Hudson and Ojo are both from Texas. So obviously money is part of it, but there's also the sell of, hey, you get compensated well, you get to play relatively close to home, and people can come watch you, right? Guyton's from Savannah, Georgia. So they went into SEC country and landed this young man. Now, it's a long time to signing day, but I think the way these agreements work now, even though we talk about the, I guess, flightiness of it at times because there's been very little in the way of rules, but with the compensation agreements, it does sort of lock them in more with those commitments to eventually sign. And Guyton was recruited by, the big ticket schools, Alabama, Florida State, Georgia, South Carolina, and Tennessee. And you might wonder, why the heck are you talking about this as a TCU host? Well, I think it's intriguing the way that they're attacking recruiting, number one. And I've discussed this offseason about how TCU is doing it a different way. They're spending most of their money on retention. So they get players that they like. If they play well, they compensate them and are able to keep them in the fold. And they've done a good job over the last few years of keeping most of their talented players. Texas Tech is trying to retain players, obviously, but it feels like they're really going after it in talent acquisition, both in the transfer portal and in the high school ranks. Now, TCU's also had some highly rated edge rushers, but Jesse Ford, a 4-star in this 2026 class, Chad Woodfork, 4-star in the 2025 class. The reason I bring it up, I think it's good for the league as a whole. And I also find it interesting the types of players that they're going and getting, because I think it's very shrewd. I've said before, the state of Texas, I'm not going to debate with people because there's no debate. It's the best high school football in the country. And I know there's like these dumb, basically exhibition games that happen early in the season where Mater D or Bishop Gorman in Vegas, IMG, like all those charter schools will come play a public school in Texas and they'll win. And then people will be like, oh, look at California, look at Florida. Shut up. Texas is the best high school football in the country. The best coaches, the best programs, the most resources. That being said, I think it's always easy to go find really good skill players in this state. No matter where you're located, you can go find fast dudes who can catch the football, big physical wide receivers, good running backs, great QBs. Texas was ahead of the 7-on-7 trend before anybody else. I know everyone's doing it now, but you understand. The reps, the speed, the intensity, it's different than everywhere else. You can find good linemen here too, but as it is everywhere, it's just tougher to find guys who have the measurables on the O-line, the D-line to be game-wrecking players. And the difference between the SEC and the rest of the country, some of it's a narrative that has kind of fed into itself. But the thing that I'll say that's legitimate, they're better up front. Each and every year they have been. Game-wrecking edge rushers, defensive linemen, really good O-lines, physical teams. The Big 12 has struggled to keep up in that regard. You look at what Texas is doing. I know Arch Manning's going to get all the headlines. And they've had great skill players too. You have to have both. But Steve Sarkisian, when he took over, made a big commitment to go get guys in the trenches. You're seeing TCU make that commitment. You're seeing Tech do that. Baylor just got Jamarion Carlton from Temple, who's a 4-star, 5-star, depending on what rating service you look at, defensive end edge rusher. And whether you like it or not, don't get me wrong, I don't want Tech to succeed. I hope they go 8-4 and we all laugh at them for how much they, spent money and won the offseason and then flamed out once the season started. But their ability to push the envelope and put their foot down on the gas pedal and say, hey, we're going for it. We've got people with money. We've got an oil man who's ready to throw cash out there. We're going to go do it. And for like all the SEC fans that complain about, well, it's just about money now. It always has been. It just looks different. It's not somebody's uncle throwing a bag of cash on the table. I guess it kind of is, but it's a little more above board now. And in a funny way, that's helped schools like Tech. I think it's going to help schools like TCU when we talk about revenue sharing. And hopefully things are going to be on a more even playing field. But yeah, of course it's about money. It's part of it, but also like Texas Tech has done a good job of building a scouting team and investing in facilities. And they've got a coach in Joe McGuire, who I think is very relatable and has deep roots in Texas high school football and knows coaches and builds relationships well. And I mean, Sonny's got that background too. He's not a high school football coach, but he knows the state really well. And TCU's trying to do something similar. They're focusing more on the high school ranks and player retention. But bottom line is, the Big 12 collectively needs to get more players like this. Because the two things the SEC has going for them more than anything, when we talk about recruits and getting the most talent in the country, you come to the SEC, you get a chance to win a national championship, and you get a chance to play on Sundays. And you might say, well, it's college football. You play anywhere, you can play on Sundays. Okay. But there's something about playing in that league that makes NFL scouts' eyebrows go up and say, okay, this is a dude. If you're successful there, you can be successful at the next level. The Big 12 needs to build that reputation again, and especially when we're talking about O-linemen, D-linemen, physical players. So for Tech to target those types of stars, everybody else needs to do it too to keep up. Well, now suddenly we have a league that is deeper and more physical than it's been. And listen, I mean, it sucks that this happened. TCU got worked by Georgia in the national title game. Now, they beat Michigan, and we all know that was a really good team. But in that ball game, there were a lot of issues. The one that stood out more than anything, though, was the depth of that Georgia team, especially on the lines up front. And so now the Big 12 has to find a way to match that moving forward, right? So Texas Tech spending all this money, making these investments, it's good for TCU it's good for the rest of the league. It's good for everybody because everyone should be pushing to do something similar. Because if the Big 12 becomes a place where the national media believes it, the recruits believe it, that you can win national titles and that you can make it to the NFL, then suddenly your recruiting pitch gets a lot easier. You don't have to go to Austin. You don't have to go to Athens. You don't have to go to Tuscaloosa or College Station. You can go to Lubbock. You can go to Fort Worth. You can go to wherever, and you can win in this league. You can come to TCU and win a national title. You can come to TCU and play on Sundays. So their spending is going to help everyone else collectively get better. When we come back, Big 12 is trying to add Louisville and Miami. We'll talk about that next year on Locked on Horned Frogs, your team every day. You can't play around with your money. Payday's coming up for us on Thursday. Listen, man, one thing I'm praising the Lord today. One of my sons, my 3-year-old Sawyer, is starting pre-K, which is awesome for a number of reasons. But it means there's one less daycare payment. I've been paying for 2 kids in daycare for like 3 years because my wife and I aren't great at planning. But Monarch Money has helped us. They've helped us plan better. When you go to monarchmoney.com, you can save 50% your first year if you use the code LOCKEDONCollege. It's not just a budgeting app, but they will help you with that. It'll help you with those recurring subscriptions, those weekly daycare payments, all those things that come up. But it's also a wealth management center. So investments, you can put all your accounts in one place. You can track, what's working, what's not. Monarchmoney.com, 50% off your first year. I'm not great at math, but I do know that's half off. And that's if you use code LOCKEDONCollege. Again, monarchmoney.com. Give it a try today. Stop wasting time with other budgeting apps. Get Monarch Money. Do it today. So the Big 12 is, I wouldn't say they're in active negotiations with anyone, but there was a story that came out a few weeks ago from Inside Carolina, which is now part of the On3 network, where they reported that North Carolina has started exploring the idea of moving to the SEC in the next few years. They have basically a committee put together that is looking at options and opportunities and what it would look like if they took a swing at making it to the Southeastern Conference. Now, 2029, 2030 is the date to know right now, because each year the ACC TV rights deal is locked in through 2036. And ACC schools are mad about that. Florida State and Clemson specifically are very upset. Apparently North Carolina's not happy too. Each year the exit fees go down. So the cost of leaving the conference starts to go down. And by 2030, it's a lot more manageable. So the Big 12 knows that. Brett Yormark's on top of that. And I saw this report from C.W. Lambert, who goes by Inside the Big 12 on Twitter. The Big 12 is targeting Louisville and Miami in expansion. And before you're like, who is that? Well, he's a realignment reporter, and he's been good in the past. A lot of people on social media have had these reports before some of the big, media members kind of come out and start talking about it. But we do know that North Carolina is actively looking to move on. And when I was talking about that North Carolina study or story, there was a YouTube commenter who was like, well, the reason the Big 12 is alive and is stuck around is because nobody in the Power 2, meaning the Big 10 and the SEC, want anything to do with these schools. And he meant that as a dig, I'm assuming. But that person's right. And it's worked to the Big 12's advantage. Honestly, people's arrogance and their willingness to thumb their nose at this league has helped the Big 12 a lot, because the Pac-12 thought the same thing. They were like, well, who cares about these Big 12 schools? Oklahoma and Texas left. They're going to die, whatever. And Brett Yormark went to the TV networks early and said, hey, I want to go ahead and negotiate our television deal, give our schools an idea of what kind of revenue we're going to be making over the next few years. The Pac-12 dragged their feet. Well, suddenly the Pac-12 falls apart. USC and UCLA say, you know what, see you later. Oregon and Washington do the same thing. And now they're trying to revive the conference, but the Big 12 outlasted them. They went and got Colorado. They took all these other member schools. And the ACC is now facing a similar dilemma. They didn't want to expand when that was a popular thing to do, when the wind was shifting and that was happening. And they've got this long-term deal with the ACC network and ESPN and their TV partners that their members are not happy about. And they're just stuck with it. And they've got, schools and programs actively coming out saying, we're not happy about this. We've got lawyers looking into ways that we can break this deal. North Carolina has a team that they've put together that they're trying to find a way to weasel out of these, exit fees. And so it's hanging on by a thread. Meanwhile, in the midst of all this chaos, the Big 12 is more united than it's ever been. And yeah, part of it is that they've kind of been kicked to the side by some other conferences. But the bottom line is you've got a bunch of schools that are working together and that want to be at the table in college football. TCU wants to be nationally relevant in college football and in other sports. Oklahoma State does. Texas Tech does. Baylor does. And they're all competing against each other, but working together to make that goal happen. Now, the worst case scenario for the Big 12 that still stands out there is that one day the Big 10 and the SEC look up and say, why are we still working with you guys? Let's take some of your schools and just become our own super league. But the more that time goes on, the less and less likely I think that is. Because you'd be removing such a huge portion of what makes college football great and all these markets and schools that have fans that are invested and that care about their teams and then also care about the playoff and who wins it all. So I think we're really moving towards a world where it's more likely that there's a Power 3. And maybe it started because the Big 12 was sort of the outcast that nobody wanted. But the result ends up being they're right there at the table with the Big 10 and the SEC mapping out what the future of the league looks like. Because they stayed together and they were unified. They didn't disband when Texas and Oklahoma jumped ship. They said, you know what, let's figure it out. They added some teams in BYU and Houston and UCF and Cincinnati that everyone kind of laughed at, but they were good additions. It stabilized things temporarily while they continued to build. They hired a forward-thinking commissioner who saw the writing on the wall and understood the evolution of college football and sports in general and was willing to try a bunch of different things. He's come with a lot of ideas. So the presidents have nixed some of them, but they've also accepted some of them, and some of them have worked. And they're constantly on the cutting edge of it, which is good to see for this league moving forward. So just pay attention. Yeah, maybe it started as, well, this league's falling apart, but it's not. They're actually weirdly in a position of power here because the ACC is unhappy. And not all the ACC schools want to go to the Big 12. I think if most of them were asked what they want to do, they would want to move on to the SEC, but the SEC is not going to add all of them. So maybe you get Louisville, maybe you get Miami, Georgia Tech, Duke. And you keep going, you keep churning out games and rivalries and new traditions. And you stay alive. That's the key now for the Big 12 moving forward. That's what's important. When we come back, some thoughts on the Frogs scrimmage on Sunday. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team We do it here every day. TCU had a scrimmage, on Sunday night, and some of you guys had thoughts or questions about that. Doug says one turnover issue that of Josh Hoover's is not mentioned enough was fumbles. 5 was far too many. He isn't a big rusher. He has to hold on to the ball. Yeah, you're totally right. I feel like I've talked about Josh and his fumble issue mainly when it comes to how he handles the ball on zone read plays and those types of things. He needs to get better there. And I feel like when we talk about Josh and his mobility, that's one problem is so many of those concepts with quarterback runs involve putting the ball in the running back's belly and then making a decision. And he struggled with that. He had a fumble in the red zone against Stanford. He had a fumble against Utah in the first drive of that game where they went down and they were near the red zone. He just lost the football and had to jump on it. I mean, the sacks, he needs to hold on to the ball better. I'd have to go back and look and see how careless he was. If you get blown up, if you get blindsided, it's tough to just hold on to the ball. But I understand your point. I'm not dismissing it. I think what he can clean up and change is if they're going to run those concepts and feature his legs a little bit more, or at least give the defense that look so they have to account for it. He just has to be better at that exchange. And with all the RPO stuff they do, he needs to be good there too. But it's a little bit different when we're talking about zone read. Are you going to keep? Are you going to hand it off? I think the thing about Josh's mobility, he just needs to be willing to take off at times or take the check down. Like there were times last season where he would get outside the pocket and there would be running room and he's not going to rip off. He's not going to get a 40-yard gain. That's not who he is. But get 5 or 6 yards, fall down, and give yourself a more manageable second or third down. Or get to the sticks and get the heck out of bounds and just move the chains and give your offense a chance to reset and keep going. If he's not going to do that, then he can't take as many risks down the field, and he has to be willing to say, okay, let me throw it to Kavorian Barnes. Let me just dump it off to Trent Battle or Jeremy Payne or whoever it is out of the backfield. DJ Rogers, your tight end. But don't take sacks. And even if you get 2 or 3 yards, it's somewhat better than 2nd and 10 or 2nd and 15, right? And I think that's just a maturity thing. That's a young quarterback learning through experience and learning on the fly. Alec said he thinks the wide receiver room regresses a little bit. Dwyer reportedly dropping some passes. Jordan Bailey being out. Ed Small being a true freshman. And Major Everhart's name not coming up a lot so far. I think it's going to regress. I feel like the question is, how much does it regress? Because I believe there's a world where if TCU has an improved run game and can keep somewhat of the same level in the passing game, then the offense is going to be better. It might not show up in the numbers, but just from a winning football perspective, playing complementary football, winning games, it'll show up in that regard. I still believe in Jordan Dwyer. He had a rough day the other day. I think he's going to be okay. He can stretch the field. I think Eric McAllister is going to have a big year. Major Everhart and Jordan Bailey, I hope it works. I think we're at the point with both of those guys where at a certain point, you got to get on the field and play and make things happen. And Bailey hasn't been practicing, which is disappointing because at the end of last year, he was a weapon. And I want him to be involved in this offense. But if you're not available, then it can't happen. And I feel like TCU has been smart about how they manage some of these guys, and they might give somebody a lighter day or give somebody a day off here and there that's been in the program for a few years and they know what they're getting from them. And it's like, okay, we can afford to, it's sort of like the NFL now. Like we can afford to give this guy somewhat of a lighter workload today. I don't think that's the case with Bailey. I feel like he must have some sort of actual situation going on because he's someone that needs those reps. We'll see, where Major ends up. I think they have options at slot. I feel like it's just about who emerges and takes over that role. And that'll be figured out in the last few weeks of camp and then once the game starts as well. On tomorrow's show, I'll do my annual top 5 reasons you should be excited about TCU football. We'll do that tomorrow. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're also free and available wherever you get your podcast.